Well, it's clearly a kind of nightmare scenario. All the companies have obviously been doing contingency planning on this. BMW was the only company to actually quantify the tariff impact so far, and even their guidance, which they gave when they reported their results on the 14th of March, didn't include any fresh EU tariffs or tariffs on vehicles coming from the EU to the United States. So we've done some modeling on this, and it obviously has very severe implications. The big question is going to be how much of the tariffs do the car makers absorb and how much they pass on to customers, which obviously inflate prices, have an impact on demand, but certainly lead to inflation in the United States as well.
Stephen, what's your view on that? How much of these tariffs are the automakers likely to absorb themselves versus passing on to customers?
Well, we're talking about very substantial impacts. We're looking at, just to take an example of BMW and Mercedes, we're modeling about 2 points of margin on a full year impact from the 25% tariff on vehicles going to the United States, on tariffs on parts coming from Mexico to their US plants, and also on tariffs on vehicles being exported from their Mexican plants to the United States. In the past, when they had the last round of tariffs, the companies were allowed to do drawbacks, which meant they were able to offset the value of their quite substantial exports from the United States to other countries. So, for example, BMW exports about $10 billion worth of vehicles from Spartanburg a year to other countries like the X5, X3, some of the bigger SUVs. So we're talking about, if you're talking about 2 points of margin, that's against the sort of expected margin of around about sort of like the 6 to 7% range. So you're talking about a very substantial headwind in terms of those figures. So they will clearly try to pass on some of it. But the big question always is, how long do these last? If we go back to 2018, when there was a major last kind of like real tariff spat between the United States and China, the kind of escalation lasted from between July and December 2018, and then it was kind of resolved. So, these things have a very strong impact at first, and we'll see really what the resolve is to actually keep these going.
The president at this point, and I guess you'd expect him to say this, if he is using these as a negotiating tactic, he's suggesting that these will remain in place, that they will be permanent changes to the tariff structure. He wants this to spur investment in the U.S. What kind of scope is there from the European automakers to make significant investments in the U.S.? Do you see them actually pivoting, or are they likely to, see this as a policy that's going to be in place potentially for the duration of Trump's term, but then change when a new administration comes into the White House?
I think you put your finger on it. I mean, clearly, when you're talking about building new plants, you're talking about multi-year commitments, really, and obviously billions of dollars. Now, if you take, for example, BMW, they have a very substantial presence in South Carolina. They make about 400,000 cars a year there. About half of them are exported. Now, clearly, maybe some of those cars could be diverted to domestic sales, but that doesn't really help the US economy because clearly America was benefiting from the export of those cars as well. It was still the same number of cars being produced. It's just where they're going changes. Also, taking a look at Mercedes, BMW, and the like, it's not as if they have a lot of excess capacity where they could actually substantially increase US production without taking massive steps in terms of actually increasing capex, which obviously takes time as well, because these are metal businesses. These aren't kind of things you can just switch on a light and suddenly you're producing 100,000 or 200,000 more vehicles for the market. So there's going to be substantial disruption. And again, they will be trying to compute how much do we want to increase US production, and potentially when these tariffs could actually be maybe short-lived, or potentially, obviously, when if there's a regime change, we go back to the older regime where there's actually more basis of free trade.